Right, I don't know if I need the microphone. Can you hear me at the back? I once went to a conference with the Minister of Education, this is years ago, and a whole room full of teachers. And the minister said, "Can you hear me at the back?" And the guy at the back said, "Yes, I can, but I'm prepared to move somewhere where I can't." So I hope that's not the same today. First of all, thank you. Thank you to everybody, to Anna-Marie and Favour and Tony, everybody who's behind this conference, because this is about families. And before Jim raised the point earlier on that I totally agree with, what I'd written here when I was thinking about this a bit more on the way up on the train this morning was, thank goodness we've got this conference, because my question is, are people not interested in families anymore? Is there a lot of talk but no action, and where is the commitment? So I'm going to make some points today that I hope will just get us thinking and begin to think about how we might be able to challenge what's going on even further. At Adfam, we do try and give a voice to families, and I just want to make a couple of sort of, I don't know what the word is, marketing points that you might find useful. If you go on our website, you'll see all the projects that we're doing. But something that we're doing at the moment in partnership with Sheffield Hallam University is David Best there, the academic, and many of you will know David. He's very committed to the recovery movement. What we're going to do, or he's with him, we're going to try and develop a community of experience of families in recovery, and David is using the model that he used for some of his previous research, which was developing communities of people in recovery. So we're going to try and translate that via this research methodology. If you look on our website, there is a or if you ring somebody in the office about it, there's our, look on our website, because there will be 2 meetings, one in Sheffield and one in London, try and get as many people as possible to sort of create the groundswell, if you like, the data collection, the evidence for this piece of research. Anyway, I will whiz on, and I know I do talk too much. I've been doing that for a long time. Okay, there's a family, and my point here is that we think of families as the backbone of society. Families provide us with our social norms, with our culture, and they maintain a structure around us. And when those families disintegrate, or when they have problems, when they become dysfunctional, they fracture, and somehow then we have often a moral dilemma, a moral panic. And drugs and alcohol, we know this, drugs and alcohol are a powerful, I was going to say stimulus, but that's the wrong word, isn't it? If a family has got a drug or alcohol problem, then that family may well struggle, it may well fracture, and it may well become dysfunctional. Not always, but it may well. And I think there's 4 different families. This is getting a bit old now, isn't it? Particularly with the one on the left-hand side. All families are different in their own way, and I think what we have to accept is that there are huge differences. And our concept, and your concept of working with families, there are lots of differences within that. And I think one of the things that we need to find out a bit more about maybe is, are there different experiences if you're the sibling of somebody who's got a drug problem? Is it different if you're a parent? Is it different if you're a child? And there are those differences. We know that, but I think we need to perhaps do a bit more work on that. But these are all different sorts of families. They work or don't work in their own way. But I think when we talk about families, drugs and alcohol, we tend to be a bit universal. And sometimes we don't always pick out the minutiae and the nuances within all that. When families fracture, and particularly when there's a fracture around drugs and alcohol and a breakdown, I think we begin to get very, very worried, and then the state has to intervene. This is baby Peter. I don't think there were drugs and alcohol implicated in his death, but the point I'm making here is when something like this happens, this is when families when it gets in the press, when it's high profile. And these are, if you'll excuse the pun, the real sharp end of family breakdown. Family stress, family unhappiness. A lot of it caused by drug and alcohol use, not necessarily in that case. But these are high, when it gets into the press, then we start to think about it and think, oh heck, you know, what's happening, society is breaking down, there's a moral panic. And I think, to pick up on one of Jim's points, we need to be thinking much more about how we prevent that from happening in the first place. My next, the point I was going to make is, Jim has already made it. So many adults are affected by a relative's drug use. The scale is huge, and as I would agree, you know, so therefore, why do we not do more about it? And I'm going to say a little bit about children and substance misuse, because it is a particular field of interest of mine. And there are a huge amount of children who are affected either by alcohol or drug misuse too. And the impact on children, and this is where I have to make this point, I am very, very aware that families often get blamed, particularly parents get blamed for family breakdown around drugs and alcohol. And many, many times it certainly is not any fault of the parents, but it does make them feel guilty and ashamed. And they often have to take the blame. The other side of that is, if children are living in a chaotic, substance misusing household, then there will be a huge impact on them and their life chances, on their experience of childhood. They will likely be neglected. There's often a lot of role confusion. Maddie mentioned kinship care. Often it's grandparents who are bringing up their children because of substance misuse, and so there's a real diversification and conflict sometimes of roles. So we can't forget that drug misuse can have a very damaging effect on children, and it can compromise parenting. Not always, but it can. I think one of the arguments that we have to start making about family support is the benefits that there are financially to our society. And some work that we did some years ago tried to find out the figure. The cost of care provided to drug users by family members would cost all that much if it were provided by health and care providers. So and Jim mentioned the word carer, and I know a lot of family members don't like the word carer. The NHS likes the word carer. So if you want to make an argument to the NHS, you maybe have to use the word carer, because if you're caring for somebody with a drug or alcohol problem, you're taking a huge burden off the financial burden off the state, and it can amount to that much. And some other work we did on social return on investment. Every pound invested in family support gives £4.70 in social value. I think one of the problems that somebody's pointed out to me earlier, currently in our current economic climate, is there isn't even a pound now to invest. So, now this is where I went, trying to be clever with my with this. Why is it important that we think about families? Why is it important that we invest in families? Families affected by addiction problems are important for 4 significant and related reasons, and 2 of these Jim has already mentioned. If you can involve a family member in the treatment of their relatives with addiction problems, it can enhance positive outcomes. Now, the other side of that, and the side that we're all here to promote today, is that family members in these circumstances show symptoms of stress that merit help in their own right, so they need help too. But we have to remember that often the economic argument, particularly now, is around what can families do that's going to reduce the economic burden on social services, on the state, on the health service. And I'm afraid we sometimes have to make that argument, like it or not. We know from the Hidden Harm report, Tony mentioned, that effective treatment of the parent can have positive effects for the child, and better outcomes for children, I believe, are achieved if they can stay with their families. Now, again, that is another economic argument, because what I've been hearing commissioners say is, Viv, come on, if you can prove to me that a family support group will help to keep a family together and keep a child or young person out of the care system, then you've got my vote. And it's those kinds of arguments, I'm afraid, that we have to start making, if we can. And of course, it's really, really difficult to make them, particularly for someone like me who didn't even get maths O-level, and that shows you how old I am. I didn't get too old for GCSE. So why should we invest in families? Why are families important? Now, families are a really, really important component of recovery, and today's conference endorses that. And in the 2010 drug strategy, there was a lot of talk about recovery and the importance of families as social capital. So if you can involve the family, it's more likely that the user will get into treatment, will get a home, will get fed, will get a job, which was the big driver behind it all, of course. So rebuilding family relationships is a key constituency of recovery, but it's often the one, and I have said this time and again to people at PHE and whatever, what we heard about with recovery was let's get somebody a job, let's get somebody a home. So there was a lot of stuff around housing, a lot of stuff about employment, but the bit that got the other key component of social capital, social recovery, the other bit, the bit that was left and neglected was the bit about families. I don't know why. I'd love somebody to tell me why. I really don't know. I just raised that question. Families provide vital recovery capital, and they're well placed to map individualised routes away from drug dependency. They're the person who's the best key worker, if you like, for that family member. But they need support in their own right to be able to do that. Right, what does family support mean? I think this is a bit of a challenge, really, because if you go around, maybe even go around this room, certainly at certain meetings I've been to, I could go around and say, tell me what you think family support means. And it means something different to so many people. And there are examples of excellent interventions that work with family members to promote the entry and engagement of a drug or alcohol user into treatment. And I think a lot of the interventions, particularly in the United States, are very much focused on that. They're focused on, let's use the family as the agent of change for the user. And where the excellent interventions that we've heard about this morning, where they differ, thank goodness, is that they respond directly to the needs of family members affected by drug and alcohol problems in their own right. And then the other, and I think Craft will possibly come into this, I'm not sure, the other intervention is that we have a joint involvement of family members. And there you are, so, sorry, but that's part of Jim's work that's I've accredited there. But so those are interventions that are evidence-based. You need training, usually to deliver or to facilitate. And then there are others, and this is where I think probably organisations like Maddie's very much come into their own, where they rely on they're not relying, but they're they're brilliant at peer support, information and community events, and I'll put AA into the peer support, the mutual aid there, befriending, telephone support. So there's all sorts of ways of delivering family support. And I think, from talking to commissioners recently, I think what they want is a kind of a magic bullet that says, this is what we do, and then we've ticked the box for family support. Tell me what it really means. A lot of informal support, and a lot, I think, increasingly acknowledgement of experts by experience, people who can help each other, who can become perhaps volunteers in this sector, and really, I think, take the lead from the recovery movement in that way. So if there's so many advantages of involving families, financially, emotionally, socially, doing away with moral panic, keeping structures together, keeping families together, why not? Why is there not the investment in family support? Why is there not the movement? And I think my first thing, I don't really know, if I'm totally honest, but what I can raise are some key issues that we've come across at Adfam about maybe some of the challenges to all this. What family members say to us is, we don't always want to be recovery capital, thank you very much. We are people. We do not want to be seen as the agent of change for the user. We don't want to be seen as social capital, recovery capital. Families need to recover too, and this is a real key point. Families are also on a journey of recovery. They need to recover too. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, and I think stigma is a real big issue here, they are not speaking out about that enough. And that's not a criticism. Often families don't feel they need support. We did some interviews just yesterday for somebody to come and work with us at Adfam. And there was a young woman who said she got personal experience. Her dad was a problem drinker. And she was asked a question by one of our volunteers, who's part of one of our peer support champions training. Where did you go for help? Where did your family go for help? And she said, my mum wouldn't talk to anybody about it. She wanted to keep it in the family. We weren't allowed to talk about it. And I think that, particularly around alcohol, I think that is really a typical response. I think the whole issue of children and recovery is an interesting one. If children are brought up in a chaotic household and then their families recover, there's a lot of readjustment for that family to do, particularly for that child who all of a sudden gets a functioning parent rather than one that was probably not parenting to the best of their ability because of drug misuse. So I think a lot of questions around that, children and recovery, that I haven't got time, not today. These are some of the barriers to 5 minutes, God, really. Oh, right, okay, I'll be quick. Stigma I've mentioned. Confidentiality. When I first came into Adfam, and it's quite a time ago now, I remember going to meetings at the NTA, and there was a family group and a service user group, and the two would not talk to each other. And there was a lot of stuff around that, sort of political, but also all this thing. I remember, I've been in this sector for far too long, probably. And I remember the whole thing about, drug users can't tell the family. And I think some of that is still there. So there's a lack of involvement there. Family members feel that they're shunned, they're cut out. The needs of the user still tend to be paramount. And we still don't talk enough about the needs of families, the harms that, whatever. What's the word I'm looking for? What's that movement with tobacco? Passive, yeah. I sometimes talk about passive drinking because we managed to break through, I think, with passive smoking. There's still the needs of the user. We still don't think about enough about the harms that substance is having on people around that person. And I'll go back to my point, intergenerational substance misuse is a problem, despite what we say about families being stigmatised and being blamed. So, a lot of challenges at the moment. There's high expectations about what family support can deliver. I'm going to say this, there is the demise currently of local support groups. Across the country, small volunteer-led groups that have in the past have done excellent work, have received money from that wonderful institution we've all forgotten, the Drug Action Team, commissioned by local authorities. They are losing out in the tendering process. They're losing out to the treatment services, who are saying, we can provide family support. Now, with the greatest respect to all my friends in the treatment services, and a lot of them would agree with this, often, I think the point's been made, people in treatment services aren't necessarily given the job of being a family support worker. They're a drug worker. They're working with people with alcohol problems. They don't know, they can't deal with this, with the greatest respect to them, so there's a real need for training. And a lot of commissioners are saying, I will only fund family support for a family who's got somebody in treatment. So the whole issue, the whole concept of giving family support in its own right is, I'm afraid, in this current economic climate, getting more and more difficult. What does success look like? I've made the point about financial return and the point about child protection. I've made those points. More and more, and another challenge is more and more people with multiple and complex needs are being identified, and that means that family members, family carers have got more and more issues to deal with. Mental health being just one of them, domestic violence is another one. Moderate drinking, we're going to do some work at some research into what are the effects of moderate drinking, home drinking, on parenting capacity. I think that's a real challenge. The other challenge is new drugs. The days of the 80s when most of the family support groups were there because set up by mothers, usually it is a genderised issue, set up by women who've got sons or daughters who've got a heroin problem. Now we've got an ageing heroin population and those people are ill, they need palliative care, so carers are older and they are caring for people who are sick because they're long-term heroin users. And there are new drugs. How do we respond? What are family members saying about new psychiatric substances, for example? What are their needs there in terms of getting information, coping with somebody who's using those kinds of drugs? They're all, they're different. And the picture is changing. We need to do a lot more joint working. We need to prove that family support, to commissioners, that family support can have an impact on children's services, social services, and everywhere else. And I go back to my point about what does family support mean? We get very confused by it. I've got one more slide, promise. This is what I call, going back to the points being made about the movement, maybe this is our Jeremy Corbyn moment. Jeremy Corbyn believes that because thousands and thousands, millions of people in this country want him to be the leader, therefore he is the leader, because he's got a movement behind him. Now that may or may not translate into votes when it comes to a general election, but what he's got is people who believe in him, and it's a groundswell movement. That's what we need. You did it with recovery for drug users. We need to do that for recovery for families. We've got to skill up a new workforce. I've mentioned that. I say the new drug strategy. Well, the drug strategy was going to be launched in February. Then it got to be, we can't do it before the referendum. Now we can't do it after the referendum because everything we've got to do is to come out of Europe. So I think it might come out in about 2030. I don't know. I don't think I'll be around. I know I won't be around. But I just think we've got to remember that a movement, we're not always talking here about professionals. We are talking about experts with experience, people who are, if there isn't any money, we rely more on the voluntary sector, we rely more on volunteers. But volunteering does not come without its price. You can't expect people just to volunteer for nothing, and they need help and support and guidance as well. Because otherwise they become a workforce that's not demoralised, that's not given the credibility it deserves. And this is my final one. If you can see that, that is a Hogarth print from, 1740. It's a London street. It's called Gin Lane. And the woman in the middle of the picture, she's got some, well, it would be gin that she was drinking. Then it was very cheap in those days, and it wasn't 30 pop a bottle from Morrison's. But she's breastfeeding the baby, and the baby's fallen down the steps. So an early case of child protection, drinking in the family, drug use in the family, and the effects of children and the other family members. So do things change? I think we've still got a long way to go. I've still got a long way to go to recognise that families have needs too, and this movement is really, really important. So today, let's hope that maybe we can kick it off today with the commitment and the encouragement that I've received today from being here with you and for listening to me. So thank you very much.